Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be giving you a full review of one of the oldest premium tanks in the game, the T34, this Tier 8 American heavy tank. The T34 is a ridgeline warrior to be feared as it has the highest alpha damage and highest penetration of any Tier 8 heavy tank, which makes the tank very unusual as it is a premium vehicle that can make you a lot of credits, and as you know, premium vehicles are usually slightly worse than their Tier 8 brethren. And this can be attributed to the fact that the T34 hasn't always been a premium vehicle. In fact, it used to be a Tier 9 heavy tank. All will be explained in just a minute, followed by some ace tanker gameplay. And if you have no interest in picking up one of these Tier 8 American premium heavy tanks, then stick around anyway and I'll tell you how you can take them out effectively on the battlefield. Way back a long time ago, in a world of tanks that would be barely recognizable now, the American tech tree looked completely different to how it currently does. In patch 7.1, there was no M103 and there was no T110E5, as well as a complete lack of American turreted tank destroyers, and no top-tier T110E3. The T30, however, was in the game, and it was the Tier 10 American heavy tank. And boy, was it a beast, but that's quite another story. And so the American heavy tree was identical how it is now, except there was a T34 in place of the M103, and the T30 was instead of the T110E5. Then when patch 7.2 came out, anyone who had the T34 as a Tier 9 American heavy tank got the T34 Premium for free. And also anyone who had the T30 when it used to be the Tier 10 American heavy tank got the Tier 9 American turreted tank destroyer for free, as well as a replacement T110E5. Oh, those were the days of World of Tanks when Wargaming were handing out 12,000 gold premium vehicles, as well as allowing you to skip almost an entire line of turreted tank destroyers and accelerate your progress to the T110E4. So you might be wondering, well, why are you telling all this? Does it really matter about the T34 in its current state? Well, maybe when you look at the stats of the T34 when it used to be a Tier 9, it will add context to this discussion. Here I've rustled up a comparison between the T34 in patch 7.1 when it used to be Tier 9 and the current T34 when it is a Tier 8 premium, as well as the M103, the replacement for the T34 when it used to be Tier 9, and how it compares then to now. So when the T34 was a Tier 9 American heavy tank, it was a force to be reckoned with a crazy rate of fire of 5.73 in today's terms, giving this vehicle a DPM comparable to a lot of Tier 10 heavy tanks right now. Also, the vehicle has more gun depression than the M103 replacement of 10 degrees, and it had monstrous penetration of 248mm, and that made a huge impact considering that back then premium rounds were not available for credits and you would actually have to spend real money on them. The T34 for me at Tier 9 was one of my favorite vehicles. I used to love to get on ridge lines and rip apart my opponents with 10 degrees of gun depression, near impenetrable frontal turret armor, and fairly usable aim time of 2.6 seconds. So obviously when they moved it down to Tier 8 and turned it into a premium tank, they nerfed it quite heavily. The tank lost 400 hit points, it lost 6 degrees a second on its hull traverse, and its turret traverse was halved, which makes a really big difference when you want to try and keep your frontal turret armor of 279mm to your opponents. The vehicle gained accuracy, however, which was a real nice feature considering that the original T34 was horrendously inaccurate, but it lost a huge amount of aim time, going from 2.6 seconds to 3.4. And now this was the killing feature for me for the T34, the fact that the rate of fire was changed from being such a healthy 5.73 to a paltry 4 rounds a minute, bringing us to the sad revelation that the T34 has the joint lowest DPM of any Tier 8 heavy tank in the game with the Löwe, which can be a significant problem when you're trying to shoot yourself out of a bad situation, and frequently means that pesky lower tiered tanks can quite often shoot the T34 multiple times in its fairly weak hull armor. Which is one of the reasons for me that the T34, while at one time it was my only Tier 8 premium tank, always was a shadow of its former self that I thoroughly enjoyed from patch 7.1 and before. The T34 is a funny old vehicle because it blows hot and cold. You have the highest penetration of any Tier 8 heavy tank, you have the highest alpha damage of any Tier 8 heavy tank, but you have the worst rate of fire and the worst DPM. Your aim time is also as equally terrible as Soviet 122mm guns, which means that you have to spend a long time aiming. But thankfully, considering the alpha damage of this tank, the accuracy is actually pretty good at 0.34. Unfortunately, however, as we can see, the dispersion of the tank is pretty horrific, which means that if you move the hull or indeed turn the turret, you're going to have to spend a long time re-aiming at your target. Thankfully, however, the vehicle has best-in-class gun depression of 10 degrees, which gives you a huge amount of flexibility for working on ridgelines. The vehicle's top speed is a disappointing 35, and while the vehicle's power-to-weight ratio looks alright at 12.5 considering this 810 horsepower engine, we can clearly see that the ground resistance of this vehicle are massively worse than other Tier 8 heavy tanks, which makes this one of the most sluggish Tier 8 heavies, especially when you go off-road. The vehicle also has a worst-in-class turret traverse of a non-adjusted 16 degrees, which can mean that you take a hell of a long time turning your turret and losing accuracy, and you really need your opponents to be quite stationary. This vehicle does not pull off snapshots easily. It also has pretty much worse-in-class hull armor, even worse than I'd say the FCM50T. But then it has best-in-class turret armor with 279mm of frontal turret armor. As we can see here, if you use the excellent 10 degrees of gun depression on the T34, you are going to be trying to get through 300mm up to 500mm of turret armor on the mantlet. And trying to get through the cheeks is very tricky as well. You're going to need 300mm of penetration to even have a 50% chance to get through. And when the T34 uses this excellent gun depression, the weak point on top of the vehicle that we can see here is very hard to deal with. But make sure you watch out with this tank that your opponents don't manage to get the top, as you do have a rather meaty cupola. The while can pull off the occasional bounce, especially on this angled part, does have a very weak crown. And you should do everything that you can in the T34 to avoid getting shot in the hull armor. As we can see here, even angled like this, it's about 175mm of effective armor, and the machine gun port, or should we say blob on front of the tank, gives a lovely easy shot for a lot of opponents. And if you exaggerate the angle even further to increase the effective armor, then you give up a nice juicy side shot on your vehicle. When you're fighting against the T34, don't be tempted to shoot it in the back of the turret, however. As we can see here, it is very thick. And angled like this, it's going to be up to 250mm of effective armor. You're far better shooting it in the side than in the back of the turret. And a skilled T34 driver should do everything that he can to avoid getting hit in the side of the turret, even though your turret reverse is terrible, as it is a very large profile and quite thinly armored. Unfortunately, the bad news continues for the T34 as it gets a paltry 360 meters view range, which is only better than vehicles such as the IS-6, and that's not saying a lot. And so that pretty much sums up the T34. Best at some things, worst at others. And so you have to try very hard to put your tank into certain situations where it can excel above other vehicles. Anyway, let's get stuck into some gameplay. And so here we go, we're in quite a nice, wow, very interesting matchup here for the T34. There are 2 Tier 9 tanks on the enemy team, and a whole host of Tier 8 heavies. What lovely matchmaking this is, with just a Tier 8 light tank, that WZ-132, lots of opportunity for him in this game. And then only 1 artillery, and there's even bottom tier propping up the team list. I would love to be that Conqueror or the Jagdtiger on the enemy team in this kind of a matchup. Holy moly, can you imagine having the Conqueror on this corner? As we're going to see, we'll have to deal with him in just a minute. So, T34, what have we talked about so far? Best penetration, best alpha damage in class, best gun depression in class, and probably best turret armor in class. What does that mean? Well, that means that you have to be a ridgeline warrior. And if you're a ridgeline warrior, you can pretty much excel every other tank that's equal tier. The T34 turret, a fine game for the 248mm of penetration this vehicle gets. A Conqueror mantlet, that's a good opportunity for 248mm of penetration. Some Tier 8 premium tanks, even firing APCR rounds, could only dream of having the penetration that the T34 does. And quite often what you'll find with the T34 is it becomes How long do I have to aim before I have to fire, or how long do I have to aim before the enemy is likely to shoot at me and pull back? We could see there that we took a little bit of a risk firing fairly early at that T34, but it paid off because we went through, I think, his turret ring, or maybe we even hit just the upper part of the side armor of that vehicle, and he misses us. You don't want to hang around in this tank. And there's the weak point on top of the T34 turret, taking him out. One thing I should mention is this replay is slightly older, and the armor on this tank is no longer standard, it will be in high definition. It didn't really change the armor model that much, so this gameplay should still be relevant. Especially when it comes to the gun performance, which didn't change at all when this vehicle was put into HD. So the IS-3 is going on a casual stroll up towards the northeast corner of the map. And you've got enough time to... I could probably go and put on a cup of tea in the time that it takes to reload each one of these 120mm shells. But that's just the way it is. And it looks like, with the fact that I was slightly AFK there, maybe I did actually go and put on a cup of tea. Sometimes when you're playing this tank, although I would never recommend this, you could probably Alt-tab out, read a few pages on Reddit, then go back in and get your game started again. That's just the way it is. Some people like that kind of gameplay. They don't need that flashy rate of fire that you might get with other vehicles, such as the FCM50T, and they're quite happy to just put in the occasional 400 alpha damage shot into their opponents every once in a while. In this kind of a situation, you see me quite worried about getting shot from my right. I don't want the IS-3 to put in a hit into the side of my turret, because from the IS-3's point of view right now, as soon as I turn my turret to the side to engage that T34, as you saw, if I turn my turret to the side, it's going to be a very easy shot for them. And so it's all about thinking, where am I going to get hit from next in the T34? You always want to keep this part of your armor towards your opponents. And that will allow you to hopefully put round after round into them. Or maybe not, because, you know, Soviet heavy armor is totally balanced and the IS-3 managed to ricochet us. But we haven't lost any health yet. We haven't even had to have our armor tested because we're exposing such a small amount of our turret. And quite often tanks don't even bother to shoot at you. Well, we bounced that shot. Did that hit our mantlet or did it hit our cheeks? Well, we've taken a couple of ricochets so far this game. Off the cheeks, at a good angle, and also off the mantlet there. We hit the top of an IS-3 turret, usually one of the weakest parts of the vehicle, but it doesn't look like we quite managed to overmatch it. And the damage in this vehicle, it doesn't add up particularly quickly, but it eventually does add up. We've put in quite a few rounds this game. It looks like 6 rounds doing 2,457 damage. And the IS-6 turret, at this kind of a range, is no problem for this 120mm gun. Well, actually, it looks like it is a problem. Who am I kidding, you know? Soviet turrets. But then again, when you've got this 248mm of penetration, you are probably like a 50-50 to go through an IS-6 with that kind of a shot. Right into the lower plate of the Tiger II. Tank that this vehicle does love to absolutely chew through. I can outtrade the Tiger II. I've got 80 more alpha damage on my gun. And so that means that he might hit me for 320, but I'm going to hit him for 400. And we'll see if he manages to last very long with those kind of trades. As he gets shut down by a fellow T34 who's towards my north. I go up to see if I can bait the T34 into shooting me, and perhaps I can even sneak a shot into his cheeks, or indeed the top of his tank, but we're unable to do so. Can the IS-3s manage to flank us from the north? And to be honest, this is what the T34 kind of just devolves into, the kind of gameplay. Right at his turret, hits the cheeks, 401 damage. Thank you so much there, Mr. IS-6. And this gameplay, it might not be the most flashy. In fact, I personally find this kind of gameplay a a little underwhelming and a little uninvolving. One of the reasons why I don't really like the T34 anymore. But there's no doubt that this is probably one of the strongest tanks at Tier 8 for this kind of work. So I'm using the IS-3 wreck behind me to hide the backside of my tank from, I believe, the AMX 1375 that was trying to take advantage of my weak rear hull armor. Luckily for us, it looks like the AMX 1390 on our team went over to stop his shenanigans and to shoo him away as we finish off the IS-6 with a round into his turret. One thing I just realized is I don't take nearly enough high explosive rounds in this tank. It's got 60mm of penetration, the high explosive rounds. And if you manage to penetrate a vehicle such as an AMX CDC or possibly a WT Alpha 100, you can do 515 average damage very quickly. One thing I should highlight just there is, did you see how the T34 just turned his turret slightly? And when you turn your turret slightly in the T34, you give your opponents the opportunity to go through your cheeks just like I did. There's something immensely satisfying about having that 248mm of penetration and being able to go through the superstructure of a Ferdinand. I don't think any other premium tank, apart from maybe the Leve, or alternatively maybe an FCM 50T firing premium rounds, could have done that.
Enemy armor is destroyed.
And this is just T34 101 here, really. Don't expose more of your tank than you need to. Out-trade your opponents. Out-penetrate your opponents. You have to control the engagement and negate the disadvantage of the fact that you have such terrible rate of fire. Unfortunately there, the VK4502 was able to put a good shot into the back of our tank, and our 10 degrees of gun depression isn't quite enough to go after the VK. I wait for him to start to engage the AMX 1390, see him turn his turret to the side, and hopefully we can give him some supporting fire. We can indeed put a good round into him, and I decide to aim at this Crusader SP, as I'm now within the danger zone of probably getting taken out the game by artillery. A lovely damage there, finishing off that Tier 7 British self-propelled gun. And now you're probably going to get your first opportunity to see the kind of mobility that the T34 has. Just ignore the 0 kilometers an hour. That's just a replay bug going in right there. It's certainly not the fastest tank, and you're really going to notice how our speed drops when we start to hit this ridgeline. I'm communicating with the 1390, asking him to just hold him there while I get into position to hopefully take out this Tier 8 German heavy tank. And there we go. Nice easy shot.
Enemy vehicle destroyed.
Right through the turret, finishing off the game and picking up a top gun. So this was a perfect situation for the T34, and it allowed the vehicle to show off every single one of its strengths, while also managing to cover up its weaknesses. The fighting was never so intense that I was ever threatened to be flanked, and so my DPM didn't really matter. I had more than enough time to slowly be able to grind out my opponents. Also, they were in quite a tight gun arc in front of my vehicle, which meant that we never had to worry about the 16 degrees a second turret traverse that this vehicle gets. I also managed to hide the entirety of my terrible hull armor with not a single shot, I think, until we started to risk our health to advance the position, penetrating our vehicle, which allowed us to use the fantastic turret armor that the T34 gets, probably the best in class frontally, to weather the storm and allow this magnificent 120mm main armament to go to town on our opponents. Now, of course, for every game that a T34 manages to get in where it can put itself in this kind of situation, there's probably going to be another game where it gets rushed by a bat chat and taken out before it's managed to put one round into its opponent. Or a T54E1 decides that he just doesn't quite like the look of you, rushes you, and manages to put all 4 of his 105mm rounds into your soft hull armor, taking you out, only giving you a single chance to return fire. Or even more frustratingly, maybe a platoon of Tier 6 medium tanks will single you out as a great opportunity and then put round after round after round into you and you simply just don't have the DPM to fend them off, or the hull armor like a lot of tier 8 heavy tanks will. And so be careful with the T34, because as with any tank that has so many best-in-class features and also so many worst-in-class features, you're completely not well-rounded, and that prevents you from being flexible and often performing in many situations. But nevertheless, if you love American heavy tank gameplay and you want to accelerate your crew training on many of your favorite tanks such as the T110E5, and your idea of playing World of Tanks is to find a ridgeline and leave a hulking graveyard of wrecks behind you, then look no further than the T34. So let's just take a very quick look at the post-game stats to see just what the economy of the T34 is capable of. And so this was a nice, juicy, fat game for the T34. We made 165,000 credits without firing any premium rounds, which gives us nearly 140,000 credits profit. And we made 5,500 experience for our double. That's 1,746 base experience points, getting some really nice crew training in my T110E5. Everything else was pretty standard for the T34. Our armor held up okay, blocking nearly 1,400 damage. And we hit 19 out of the 20 that we fired at that kind of short to mid-range engagements. And of those 19 hits, 16 penetrated, allowing us to secure a lovely 5,313 damage. And so there you have it, the Tier 8 American Premium Heavy Tank, the T34, probably one of the least well-rounded heavies, but certainly best in class for trading along ridgelines. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving it a like down below, it really helps the channel out. And if this video has sparked your interest in the Tier 8 American Premium Heavy Tank, then simply click through up here and you can go through to a monster replay of the T34, gaining over 200,000 credits and I think 2,000 base experience points. Or use that more info icon in the top right hand corner of your screen. And let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about the T34. Were any of you players back in patch 7.1 who used to love this tank at tier 9? Do you love it or do you hate it in its current state? Let me know what you guys think. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.